of our groups this summer are taking a break. So Jonathan and I decided let's try something different. And this week we are going to be looking at God's presence, which is like this kind of nebulous idea. And I think it raises a lot of questions for us. So I think, we've all experienced God's presence in very different ways. So this conversation is very much about just like our questions. What does it look like? What does it feel like for each of us? And hopefully it will spark your thinking and your reflection on this topic.
Well, I think that one of the things about that it's very, very clear from Scripture that God's presence amongst us is really important to Him. That He went to great lengths right the way from the moment that the presence was broken, in a sense. When Adam and Eve decided that His presence was optional, and when we can actually think about that in terms of the relationships we have with people, that when somebody suddenly decides that our presence is perhaps optional. I mean, I know I experienced that with my children when suddenly at some stage in the proceedings they suddenly decided, well, Dad's not that important anymore, and that hurts. I mean, it hurts us a lot more than it hurts them. But I think that, and I sort of feel like that in a way that's what happened. And then God seems to have gone to he's gone to great lengths to re-establish His presence. And you get that wonderful verse at the end of Revelation where He says, God once more dwells with His people, like which is, I think, what He intended to do in the first place. So
maybe Shannon, do you want to kind of begin with that? Like, what does it feel like to you when you've sensed God's presence?
I think for me, it's been more of a journey of seeking and trying to be more sensitized. I only had one experience years ago in a conference. John Wimber asked the presence to come, and I felt this weight on my here, and it just it squished me down. And that was powerful, but I have not had anything like that since. That was like decades ago. But now, I the last couple of years, I've been crying out to Jesus, I have to have more of you. I must have more of you. And so I've found myself, I'm in situations over the years where there have, been, the presence of God has been strong according to what other people are sensing, but I often don't feel that either. But what it's been coming to as I have tried to be purposeful and intentional about, for instance, when Jonathan made that reference about the presence of God was thick here, I have been around people who have felt in the sanctuary that it has been thick at different times or has been noticeable for them. And so when they say that, to me, I will go in there and I will kind of try to connect to that.
Yeah.
So there is a moment, where I, give an opportunity to feel that, or what that could feel like. And I think for me, there is a quality of that it's very subtle, but I pick up on kind of a sweetness, maybe a gentleness, rest, peace, those things come to mind. And so that's been something that has been growing. And then I have to say that over the pandemic, a lot of us had forced time, more time, and we've talked about that and how that looks. And I have been pressing into, actually the Passion Translation has really changed how feeding on the Word has been really rich. And so it's compelling me to want more, and that's been really good. But recently I've opened up a Song of Songs, and I feel like the Passion Translation has touched the another layer, maybe a higher layer of intent that God had when he wrote that. And so I have been hanging out there, and I have to say that is taking me to a sweet place, because this union that we have and what God is trying to communicate, there's a lot of imagery in there that is really rich in all kinds of sensory ways, and you can explore that, you can kind of move into that. And personally, there's this one verse that says, "Oh, my beloved, both handsome and winsome, pleasing beyond words you are, and our resting place is anointed and flourishing like a green forest meadow bathed in light. Cedars of branches of cedars are over our heads, and sweet smelling pines." That idea of, for me, I connect to nature, very much, and so I'm able to like really enter into that and kind of milk it, so to speak, and cultivate that. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because that's been really powerful for me, to find, there is an exchange that's happening that is deepening in my knowledge, but it's becoming more experiential.
I love what you were describing about nature, because I do have these moments when we're hiking somewhere or we're experiencing something that is very engages all of my senses, and God will sometimes bring to mind a scripture that scene or that experience is illustrating, and then it comes alive to me. And for me, that feels like the presence of God walking with me as I'm in that place, and he's almost like taking my eyes into a different understanding that I maybe would not have made that connection on my own. And I feel God's presence in that way, where it's like there's an engagement of my knowledge, right? There's my knowledge of the Bible, an engagement of my personal story that I'm going through at that moment. So there's an unraveling of my heart and what I am going through or wrestling with him, and then him speaking life and truth through all of those different elements of who I am as I'm walking with him.
And I think that's really interesting, because I think that there is from what I hear, and I think that this is true for me, there is a sense of intention in both of what you've both been saying, rather than suddenly he came and whacked me over the head with something that I didn't expect. There's a sense of intention that says, first of all, because one of the things that we've been seeing that the scripture has said to us time and time again is, and I, in a sense, I feel like this is the message, the underlying message that's come almost every sermon that I've preached about this, is God is asking us to believe and trust in him. And what he says, I'm present. So we begin by saying, okay, so whatever I do or don't feel, I know he is here, and I choose to believe that that's true. And because I heard you saying that, Shannon, when you're saying, I know it's true, and I'm asking him to make that real, not because I know it is real, but I want to in some way experience its reality. You see,
the presence of God, does it matter in our lives?
Well, I mean, the only way I can answer it is the fact that if I remind myself that however difficult my circumstances are, I mean, there are some things that, some things happen and you just feel devastated by them, or you feel irritated by them, or frustrated by them. If I remind myself of the certainty of the presence of God, then it's a bit like the question, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief, because I believe that you're present in this, but my goodness, I can't see what you're doing, and I can't see why you're doing it, and that's driving me crazy. Right. But I'm going to intentionally say, you're present, you know what you're doing, you don't make mistakes. And so that acknowledgement of the truth of the presence of God is, I think, is important for me.
I think, when we see the children of Israel, we've been in Exodus, and they left Egypt, and the first stop that they make for, I think it's almost a year that they are at Mount Sinai, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. The first big stop is at Mount Sinai, and what does God want to reveal there? He reveals his presence, that he's with them. Of course they freak out because it's too intense for them. But then he spends actually a long period of time while Moses is up on the mountain, giving him plans for the tabernacle, which is plans for his dwelling.
The place he's going, yeah.
Right. So there's something important in the journey that they're about to make, that his presence being with them is a foundational piece of this journey.
And it seems to me that he recognizes that it's going to be difficult for them. I mean, actually he does something slightly before that, because when they're waiting to go across the Red Sea, he gives a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud, just so that just to reassure you that I'm here.
Right.
Because he's saying, look, I know that this is difficult for you to believe. This is difficult. Sometimes I wish he'd do that now. I mean, can I have a pillar of fire just to reckon? but he gives them those things, those little tangible things that they have to believe and trust that that's fire and that's God, and that's cloud and that's God. So they do have their trust has, in a sense, is being developed. And then he descends on the mountain, as you say. But he wants to establish a place where he is present, and that they know he's present.
Yeah. I know for me, a lot of the time that I have felt God with me in a journey, even when things are very uncertain about what the outcomes are going to be, that's knowing that God is with me really helps me to feel bolder in the decisions that I'm making. So I think Brendan and I have particularly felt that as we have taken risks in life. And I think there's some of the risks, like when we started Trekkaroo, that was quitting jobs, putting all the eggs in one basket, and we really sought God before we made that decision, and really felt the sense of God is with us in this. He's calling us into this. It doesn't mean that therefore everything will be successful. The journey can be very hard, but it helped to know going in that God had, I won't say that he spoke in an audible voice, but we just had this agreement that God is with us in this. He was speaking to us about that situation, and throughout the journey, whenever we felt like we wanted to give up, and we sought him again. It's like, what's going on? Why are things not working out? And him saying, I want you to learn to persevere in this, and that I'm working things out in your life through this experience. May some of the really difficult things that we had to encounter have meaning to it, and not just like, oh, open door, closed door, open door, closed door. It wasn't so simplistic. It was much more complex about the discipleship that he was taking us through. And I think it's in that relationship of discipleship as we walk with God through the journeys of our life that I felt God be really present with us. Like as we struggle with our fears and struggle with our disappointments, and him speaking into those areas of our hearts. That's how I felt God's presence be, kind of make a difference for me.
I think I felt that, sometimes the fact that God has been present is easier to see in retrospect than it is in prospect. I remember the same thing. I remember so clearly when I first came to Pacifica, and I spoke at what was then Pacifica Christian Church, and after 3 weeks they asked me if I would consider becoming their pastor, and I just sort of nodded, grinned, and said, and I drove out of the parking lot with my two boys that were pretty small at the time, and I said, there is no way in God's green earth I could become the pastor of this church. I said, because, you know, I've got a mortgage, I'm at seminary, and there's only about 15 people here, and but there was the presence of God, in a sense, inside says, yes, but you're going to do it. This is what I'm going to have you do. And, you know, the rest is history, but it's those are the things that there are on occasions where God had and I suppose I've never really sort of thought about those things as the presence of God. But it is the presence of God. It is, He impresses upon us something, and He does that that's His presence is impressing it.
But I think, you know, I'm transitioning to like New Testament, Jesus, you know, the reality that we have been chosen to be His dwelling place now is the whole game changer, you know.
Yeah.
So,
it is.
So how do we access what is already in us? Because we've opened that door of our hearts and our lives, and He is in us. And so I think there is, when you were talking about the intentionality of turning, you know, I think sometimes you know, a couple of years ago or decades ago, I would have felt that this was somehow creepy and not right to say turning inward. But it is an inward reality that He is with us.
Yeah.
And so to turn inward and say, you know, because I didn't want it to be all like weird psychology or whatever, you know, visualize this or whatever, but it's more like, but the reality is He is chosen us as His body. Like Jesus is in our body. You know?
Right.
And so we are His body, figuratively, literally, and the whole bit. And so how do we access that?
He said He experienced everything as a human being. So He had to access the presence of His Father in the same ways He's calling us to. I mean, I'm just thinking about this as I'm talking to you. I haven't quite, but clearly there is so much that the life of Jesus can actually teach us about the fact that this is how that He had to do this too.
And He did it through a yielding of Himself to the Father, right? And so much of the Christian journey is about yielding to what God is doing in your life. And
I think that I was listening to John Mark Comer from Bridgetown in Portland, and he was talking about the fact that he said every morning when he has his devotional time, he said there's a time at the end when he said I sit in quiet and try to imagine the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit loving me, and how would that feel? And he said, I'm asking Him to love me into loving other people.
Yes. I've noticed that this is a choice too.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as I feel like I'm getting more connected to that union and the reality of Him and me and Him and us and, you know, all of that, and the Song of Songs is helping a lot. You know, I feel like it's helping me to, I don't know how to explain this except that, you know, I'm not going to lie, I get triggered with this whole political stuff right now. And as you guys know, a bunch of you, and so, but I've noticed that it's like that is dimming, and the love that he is, you know, I'm connecting to more because He is love. I'm able to choose and say, I'm really just, it's almost like the light is going off on that. And I'm walking into love and choosing to look at my brothers and my sisters and everybody else and just not be provoked, you know, to not, you know, because I could be if I wanted to be, or if I could move in that direction quickly, but it's like I'm so done with that. So I'm like, I want to love people, and I want to carry his joy, and we should be the happiest people on this planet. We're connected to the living, wonderful God. So like, why would I not be in a good mood today? Or what?
So at the risk of being formulaic about this, I think it would be helpful to kind of talk about, like, are there little things that you do to try to be more aware of God's presence, right? That maybe people could try. So I can start. Like, one of the things that I do is I like to journal. And in my journaling, it helps me to almost become present with myself first, so that then I can bring my real self to God and sort of talk to him about where I'm really at. And sometimes in my journaling, I will switch and just say, okay, God, now speak to me. And I will begin to write as if he is speaking to me. And I will just, whatever thought comes into my mind, I write it as if he's speaking to me.
One thing that comes to mind is I hike or walk almost every day, and I always invite, in the very beginning, I always invite the Lord to walk with me. So I just try to keep that connection the whole time. And I don't get myself, I don't beat myself up if I found, I'm off and who knows where. It's like I just pull it back, and just centering and saying, focusing, and we empower what we focus on. And so just in my life in general, but certainly in hikes, just turning and saying, I want you to be with me, and just so we go in and out of conversations and prayer, and it's just fluid, and then also with no condemnation, because the reality of keeping that attention span that long. But that's one of the things that comes to my mind, and
one of the things that I do is, in my quiet time, there's two chairs. I always sit in the same chair. Some people like to do it, or I'm always in the same place. And there is another chair in my room, and it's empty. And I try to imagine him in that chair and talk to him. I sometimes do that more than others, and I always try and start I always try to start I journal. I don't journal quite like you do, but so sometimes my journal is just like a prayer. I always try and say thank you. I try and go back to my yesterday and say all of the things that I noticed that God did. And the conversation that I had with this person, or the place that I went to, and so try and focus on that, which also helps me focus on the fact that I'm saying thank you to him, and he sat there. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for doing that, and why didn't you do that?
Yeah, sometimes you have to look for it, isn't it? I mean, and by doing the Thanksgiving, you are looking for God's presence in the everyday and ordinary of life.
Yeah, and I think it's like we've been saying, I think repeatedly, is the fact that we begin by saying, I know God is present. I know God is present. Psalm 139 tells me so clearly that there's nowhere I can go from his presence. But I want to access that presence for me personally. And I know that he has made that available to me, but I have to reach for it.
More real.
Yeah, make it more real or whatever.
Well, this has been certainly very interesting, and I hope that it's spurred lots of thinking for you guys. And if you have more questions, I guess.
Ask Shannon.
Ask Shannon, ask Jonathan.